but we're okay. Can everybody hear me?
Right. Literally that mic, that's all there is.
Okay. All right.
Oh, so that's a mic.
Don't mess with the tech.
Oh, I'm gonna be actually talking. Sorry. What? I'm actually talking.
Oh, it's gonna be a good day.
I'm gonna be,
Oh,
I'm just waiting.
okay.
We're not in the room where we're gonna freeze to death.
May. I was gonna say, give it time.
I wore a sweater.
Always wear. Yeah, layering is always
Yes,
appropriate.
Alita's found that out.
Yes. Yeah.
These skinny little things, you feel cold. I don't have that problem.
You're still wearing a long sleeve shirt.
I'm rolling it up too.
It's nice in here right now.
Trying to make this So, good morning. This is the special board, welcome to the special board meeting of the Board of Vocational Nursing and Psychiatric Technicians. This meeting is being held Friday, June 21st at Department of Consumer Affairs, 1747 North Market Boulevard, Hearing Room, first floor, 186 in Sacramento, California. I would like to call this meeting to order. We are going to establish quorum. I am Tammy Mendoza, current board president, and to my left,
I'm Bernice Basque Martinez, current vice president and public member.
Hi, my name is Paula Amazola, public member.
Hello, my name is Dr. Carol Mountain, education member.
Cheryl Turner, public member.
Alicia Carpenter, public member.
Kenneth Maxey, public member.
thank you, and John Durkin will be joining us shortly. If I could have Elaine introduce herself and the staff that's here.
Thank you, Madam President. Elaine Yamaguchi, the Executive Officer. And, well, golly, here with us today, board staff, Jennifer Johnson, our licensing manager, Marie Cordero, our supervising nursing education coordinator, consultant, pardon me, Tim Matsumoto, Samantha Kalma, Jenny Pinales, Vicki Lyman, Candace Rainey, and of course we have some DCA staff guests and presenters, Patrick Lay, Dennis Frankie, and Trish.
And then if we could have board counsel introduce himself.
Good morning, everyone. Kenneth Swenson, Department of Consumer Affairs, Staff Counsel 3, assigned counsel for the board.
Thank you. Now, if we could invite everybody to stand with us and do the Pledge of Allegiance as led by our board vice president, colleague, Bernice Basque Martinez.
And we've relocated the flag up here, over here, please.
If everyone will please face the flag and repeat with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So we are on agenda item 4, unfinished business from May 2019, discussion and possible action on board committee structure. Presentation to the board from DCA. Patrick Lee and
Dennis Zink.
Dennis.
That's all right. All right, so I'm going to do a short introduction. My name is Dennis Zinke. I'm with DCA's Strategic Planning Unit, and we also do meeting facilitation. Tricia St. Clair is also with me, and we're going to scribe some of the notes from today, so you'll see them up here. So what we talk about, you'll see what the end result gets to be. I'm going to do a short introduction about what we're going to do for the next hour or two, and then Patrick will come up and give us an overview a little bit more about committees, and then we're going to jump into the meat of today, which is what subcommittees should we have or what committees should we have, who should be on those committees, how often should those committees meet, what are the function of those committees, and then whatever else comes about. So we have about 2 hours or so, is that what we have? Usually doesn't take that long, but we've got the time if we need it. So a little bit about the intro is why does BVMPT need committees? We're going to talk about what makes a committee effective, identifying the needed committees, that's where you all are going to come in. What committees do we need? And then for each committee, like I mentioned, kind of a purpose statement, just a 1 or 2 sentence statement of why do we have whatever committee we're talking about. How will the committee achieve its purpose? In other words, just what are the functions? Are you going to review reports? Are you going to review cases? What are you guys going to do? Then we'll talk about meeting frequency. Meetings are ad hoc. Sometimes they're quarterly. Sometimes they're monthly. Sometimes whatever you all decide. And then ideally we would find 2 board members to be on each committee, and then also maybe identify which staff members might also be on the committee. Make sense? Sound doable? With that, whoops, there we go. I have a couple rules. You've probably seen these before. Nothing earth-shattering. First, please participate. However, there's an asterisk for the participate. I would like your permission that if the conversation drifts or it seems like we're starting to lose time, do I have your permission to maybe interject in the conversation and try to keep it on track? All right, I see thumbs up. That's a good sign. Keep on point. This is mainly, we don't have a lot of time, so just be succinct. Also, as you may have already guessed, it's being webcasted, so just be aware. It's being webcasted. Speak loudly for our microphones. Respect each other's contributions. We often hear ideas that maybe are conflicting. That's kind of what our job is. But just respect everybody's contributions and let everybody be heard. And then be willing to reach consensus with decisions. And what that really means is you may not love the idea, but can you live with it? Do you feel like it does the right thing for the citizens of California or for whatever purpose we're working towards? So with that, we're going to turn it into you. So we're going to switch. Can you switch it over to?
All right, good morning. My name is Patrick Lay. I'm the Assistant Deputy Director for DCA Board and Bureau Services. Before I start, I want to share a funny story because I think most of the people who come to BVNPT board meetings think I'm this random guy in a suit that sits in the back taking notes. I'm like, who's this guy, right? So it's finally great to feel useful. Actually, it's funny, the last couple board meetings ago, I think the one you had in Ontario, I came in the room and I was a little late. And then I think it was one of the program directors like, oh, are you one of the high school students who's trying to be an LVN? I was like, no! That's why I'm trying to grow a beard so I can be relevant. But in any event, thank you so much for having me this morning. And to give you context about why I'm giving you this presentation, part of my day job is to support all the healthcare boards at DCA. So I get to work with the Board of Vocational Nursing and Psychiatric Technicians. We also get to work with the Board of Registered Nursing, the Dental Board, the Board of Optometry, the Board of Chiropractic Examiners. So when I understood that you were trying to rethink the way you do committees, I thought I'd be helpful by giving you this presentation about the traits of an effective committee using lessons learned from other DCA boards. So to give you a sense of the process, what I did for the past month and a half is that I interviewed various executive officers from other programs, and I looked at about 20 healthcare boards under DCA. And so based on these conversations, I inquired about what was the purpose of their committees, the structure that they were using, and how they were operating. And so based on all of that information, I compiled a list of practices that worked well for other programs, but also a couple tips about what didn't work well for them. And so I'll preface this presentation by saying that these are just a number of tips that I gathered from conversations with EO, and so by no way I'm saying this is what you need to do, but I'm imparting with you what I've learned from these conversations. So today's agenda is really simple for me. I got 4 things that I want to cover with you. First is general observations that I've gathered from this conversation. 2 is the why and the how of committees and how they're created. 3 is provide you with some examples from other boards. And then finally, I want to talk about meeting structure and so how these committees meet throughout the year. So if that's cool with you, I'll jump straight into it with some general observations. The first one being that most boards generally have in between 3 and 5 standing committees. Actually, BVNPT holds the record of having the most number of committees out of all DCA programs at 9. But you probably know that the most popular committees are enforcement committees and licensing committees, and the second most popular one tends to be legislation and regulations. Now, there are some boards that do have more than 5. They can have 6 or 7. But what's interesting to note is that 2 programs that have more than 5 have recently restructured in the past year to whittle down the number down to 5. They went through a process where they felt that more than 5 was not useful. And there are a couple other boards who have more than 5 who've acknowledged that there are certain committees that have not met for more than a year and a half. So they're currently thinking about restructuring their committees as well. So in general, I tend to observe that most boards have between 3 and 5 standing committees. Other thing that I wanted to note is that some boards don't have committees. So that tends to be the smaller boards in smaller licensee population and smaller operations. But I thought it was important to note because it really means that you don't need a committee for every single issue area that comes across your board. As an example, that some boards can operate without any committees. And then the last one, and I mentioned that some boards have committees that exist but may not meet. So again, some boards have committees that have not met in over a year. So really, kind of these conversations mean that committee structures can be very diverse. They can be very different. So I ask executive officers, well, you know, what's kind of one trend that really stands out? And so from all these conversations, I think there's one overarching trend that comes out. And that's my first takeaway of this presentation, and that is boards should be able to easily create, disband, or cancel committees in order to carry out business effectively. So don't feel like you need to be tied to a single structure. Don't feel like you need to be tied to a particular committee. It's okay to rearrange, change in order to fit the business of the year. So why committees? So I think this is pretty straightforward, but worth noting. As there is limited time at general board meetings, committees allow the board to dive deeper into specific areas or issues. It also helps streamline some processes that require board input and heavy staff workload. I think you're very familiar with that in terms of the program approval process. The Board of Registered Nursing does the same. So if there's a heavy workload that requires staff analysis and staff input, but also board review, all of that would go through a committee and then go to the full board for approval. So the streamlining is really an essential part of having committee work. And then also important to note that not all activities require committee work. Some can be conducted at the full board. And so one trend that I've seen in the conversation that I had is boards who would have a committee and then they realize that there's not enough substantial content for that committee and that content can actually be taken up at the full board. So a common example is public outreach, where the board set up a full committee, and part of the conversation is what kind of social media content you want to post, what kind of editorial articles you want to write, and then the board realized that actually you don't need to have that at a full committee. You can have 20 minutes at the board meeting to have that conversation because staff mostly does the social media content, or they can work offline with a particular board member to write an article. So they realized that they don't need a separate committee meeting, so they would bring that to the full board. So based on these conversations, a couple more takeaways. Takeaway number 2 is that committees should assist in conducting business that otherwise couldn't be completed at a general board meeting. Takeaway number 3 is committees should be created cautiously, as more committees mean less input from the board as an entire body. Ideally, you want the entire board to be able to weigh in on a particular issue. And so the more you offload some topics to committees, the less the full board is able to weigh in on an important topic. And so a lot of executive officers shared instances where the committee would meet, they would take a particular vote or decision, bring it to the full board, and during the full board conversation, some board member would say, well, I wasn't part of the committee discussion, and I don't really feel comfortable with the decision that has been made. I'd like to be part of that conversation. And so then you have that dance where you have to bring it back to the committee or have this offline conversation with another board member. So really, it's a game of balance where you want to make sure that you create committees when it's needed, but be cautious because you also want to make sure that the full board has an opportunity to provide input. And takeaway number 4, probably the most important takeaway of this whole presentation, because every single executive officer has said that to me: don't meet just for the sake of meeting. And I think every EO that I've spoke to had this issue where they would create a committee and then they would realize that there's not enough items for an actual agenda or not enough content, so they would say, let's push it to another meeting. So they would wait a month or two. They would come up, time to meet, still not enough agenda items. Well, let's just meet just because we have to meet. So really don't meet just for the sake of meeting because, travel expenses, lodging, or teleconference, finding time on your schedule. So really, it's don't feel the need to meet just because you have a committee. So then I started asking, executive officers, hey, what's a good test to kind of say, it's enough to meet? And so based on these conversations, there was this cool thing that we created. Committees must have meaningful and substantial business content at a regular cadence. I'm going to kind of dive deeper a little bit into that. Meaningful, meaning that the business conducted at committees is critical to conducting board business. Substantial, meaning that you have enough to create an agenda item for a full meeting, maybe half a day or a full day of content. But it also needs to be at a regular cadence. So you have enough business to meet several times a year, whether it's monthly or every 3 months. So if it's critical to board business, and if you have enough meeting content for multiple meetings in a year, then you have passed the test that you may need a committee for that. So how are committees created? So I talked to different boards about kind of how these committees have originated. Model 1 is based on the strategic plan. So I'll pull up a specific example, which is the California State Board of Pharmacy. I'm pulling that from their strategic plan. They have 5 goals on their strategic plan, and their committees are based on these 5 goals. They do have an extra one, the compounding committee, but that's because compounding in the world of pharmacy is a huge issue, and it came regularly at their board meetings, so they decided to create an extra committee for that particular topic. So it really exemplifies they used their strategic plan as the basis, and then they added, and they had that flexibility based on what was coming through to them. Model 2 is based on most active areas of operations. So the Board of Psychology is a good example. They had a number of committees, and then they decided to restructure based on what was the board most active on. So they have a policy and advocacy, outreach and education committee, licensing, and enforcement committee. They stick to these 4. Any other topics is an ad hoc committee. So for example, telepsychology, which is an important topic to the Board of Psychology. So, but they mostly stick to these 4 and have ad hoc committees as needed. Model 3 is the task force / the subcommittee model. A good example of that is the Naturopathic Medicine Committee. And essentially, they create their committees based on major legislation of the year that has passed or major topics that come across the board. So they have 3 subcommittees: IV therapy, prescribing, and furnishing, but it's based on what is really critical in terms of business areas for the board. And then the last model is delegation. That was an interesting one, and so I'll give 2 examples for that one. The Veterinary Medical Board and then Dental Board. Veterinary Medical Board has the Multidisciplinary Advisory Committee, and the Dental Board has the Dental Assisting Council. And what they do is that they actually appoint individuals into the committee to provide expertise on particular topics. So it's a way for the board to realize that, well, actually, first, I think they're statutorily created, so they kind of have to do it. But 2, it's also because maybe the board doesn't have the necessary expertise available in order to dive deeper on the topic. And a lot of time boards are created via appointment authorities, so the governor's office, Speaker of the Assembly, Senate rules. So you may not have the expertise that you need on the board. So what Veterinary Medical Board and Dental Board do is that they actually open an application. They look for experts. They say, we're looking for experts in these particular areas. They will go through an interview process, and the committee would be created by appointment. So the board reserves the authority to appoint experts on their committee. So that helps them kind of pick and choose the type of expertise that they have on their committees. So other examples, medical board is a big one. They have 2 committees that were set into law, the Special Faculty Permit and the Midwifery Committee. So these were created into law, so they have to have them. They have 3 standing committees, licensing, enforcement, and public outreach. And they have 2 committees that meet on an as-needed basis, which is editorial and executive. And then they have 7 task forces, and so these were to address very specific topics. So they have many task forces, but they don't necessarily meet for the year. Optometry has 4: legislation and regulation, practice and education, public relations and outreach, and consumer protection. I think you'll see that a lot of boards kind of follow that as kind of a basic. They have always kind of these kind of 4 committees. Oftentimes consumer protection may be renamed enforcement, but these are generally what we see across other boards. So takeaway number 5, really committee structure should be tailored to the expertise available to the board and should consider what works best for board members and for board staff. So that's a way of saying that really there's no one model that would work for everyone, but you should really create a model that works for you and that works for staff in terms of delivering efficient and meaningful committee work. So who sits on committees? There's really 2 models. Model 1 is by appointment of the president based on interest or expertise available on the board. So essentially when it's the beginning of the year or the end of the year, the president would open it up for interest and board members can say, I'm interested in sitting on this committee or that committee, and that be worked out by the president. There are some boards that do it by elections, but it's rare. I think there's only 2 boards that do it that way. But just for you to know what else is out there. And then meeting structure. So that one is interesting. When should committee meet? So model 1 is before every board meeting based on member availability. So some boards will say, let's make sure that every committee meets before a board meeting. So they would go on people's schedule and try to find a meeting availability. I'll be candid with you. From my conversation, it seems that model 1 is very difficult. And a lot of boards are starting to move away from that model. And I'll go in a bit deeper when we get there. And then model 2 is on an as-needed basis. So whenever there's an urgent issue related to enforcement or licensing or the stats seem to be a little off, then the committee would meet. So model 3 is one that's been becoming a lot more popular at DCA. It's the combined committee meetings. So all committees meet on one day, usually a month or before after the board meeting, and that's the current model used by the Board of Registered Nursing. Or, and that's a new one, all committees meet the day before of the board meeting, and that's the new pharmacy model. I'll go into details for these 2. BRN has essentially 4 committees: education licensing, intervention discipline, nursing practice, and ledge committee. So these 4 committees will meet in 1 month, so they have 1 day full of committee meetings. And then a month later, they have 2 board meetings, 2-day board meetings. So in August, they will have 4 committee meetings that will meet for the entire month. And then in September, they will have their 2-day board meeting. Pharmacy has recently, at their last board meeting, approved a new structure for their committees. What they're going to do is that they're going to do an annual committee meeting to set goals. So every committee will meet at least once a year just to set goals. And then it's combined committee meetings in 1 day before the board meeting. So the day before the board meeting, all the committees will meet similar to BRN just to kind of give an update. But the big meet is going to be that annual committee meeting. And so they essentially used to do kind of on as-needed basis, but again, difficult to schedule. So they're going to try out this model because they feel it would be a little bit more efficient. So what are the benefits of combined committee meetings? One, a lot of people mentioned the consistent flow of information for board members. I think a lot of board members are very busy. They have a busy schedule. They have other things, full-time jobs. And so there's several instances where when you meet on an as-needed basis, you get the information, but then you don't get to re-explore that information until the board meetings. So by the time you get to the board meeting, like, I know we had this conversation in the committee meeting, but it was so long ago, I don't really remember. So when you set a combined committee structure like this, it makes sure that at least on the regular cadence, you have the information so it's still fresh in your mind. 2, it's streamlined process for staff. If staff does or prepare for meetings and really the schedule is on as needed, it's a bit all over the place. You have to prepare materials on weird times of the year. So if you set all your combined committee meetings in one particular day, it helps staff know that this is the day that all the committee meetings are going to happen. We can get prepared. So a lot of executive officers mentioned that doing combined committee meetings has helped really streamline the workload because they know when the committee day is coming, and so that helps prepare all the materials in one package. And then 3, I think that one was interesting, is that it enables participation for all the board members who are not sitting on the committee. So because, for example, all the committee meetings are on one day, a lot of board members will be able to go. And then what you see is that board members who not necessarily sit on the committee can still sit in the audience. And so they can still see what the committee is talking about, how to participate. In some instances, some board members really want to provide input, would provide it at the public comment level. So they would, be like a public commenter and say, hey, I'm not on the committee, but I want to still provide my feedback. And then since the board meeting is, shortly after, all the board members can feel like they actually saw what happened in committees, and so you have that sense that everyone is on the same page. So takeaway number 6, committee meetings should be scheduled in ways that maximize operational effectiveness. I think that's to recognize that scheduling is one of the major challenges of committee meetings, and so that's why the more structured or the more efficient you can make that, the better it is for the board. So, in summary, board should be able to easily create, suspend, or cancel committees in order to carry out business effectively. Committees should assist in conducting business that otherwise couldn't be completed at a general board meeting. Committees should be created cautiously, as more committees means less input from the board as an entire body. Don't meet just for the sake of meeting. Committees must have meaningful and substantial business content at a regular cadence. Committee structure should be tailored to the expertise available to the board and should consider what works best for board members and for board staff. And finally, committee meetings should be scheduled in ways that maximize operational effectiveness. So I think if I were to take all of these conversations and boil it down to 3 recommendations, 1, create committees based on your strategic plan or your most busy areas of business. I think it seems that a lot of boards have gone that route, or a lot of boards that had or felt like they had too many committee meetings ended up whittling down using kind of that rule of thumb. Number 2, I would say limit your committees to no more than 5 committees. You can test that with a meaningful, substantial, and regular cadence test. I think boards that tend to have more than 5 didn't feel like it was useful, so I would say no more than 5. And then 3, if it works for you, centralize your committee meetings into one-day meetings, because it seems that there's benefit to centralize everything into one day, both in terms of the staff workload, but also board members' ability to sit in or participate or observe committee meetings. So that would be my 3. These are the Patrick recommendations. So that's all I got for you, so I can take any questions that you may have. I'm going to hydrate too, because I'm getting parched.
So Patrick, how does that work with Open Meetings Act? As far as the one day, and you have like a standing committee of 2, but you have 5 board members in there, and you're placing input into it, but it's not noticed. Does that become a violation?
Maybe Ken can help me on that one.
So long as the board member only participates in the discussion during the public comment session, it would not be a violation of the Open Meeting Act. An interesting question, though, would be, do the boards that do combined meetings publish the agenda for the meetings ahead of time?
So for Board of Registered Nursing, the answer is yes. And I think their committee meetings are noticed. And actually, I think a lot of folks realize that the meat of the work that they do is during committee meetings. So for the sake of transparency and public participation, they notice all of their committee meetings like an event. And I think the public knows that, usually the board tends to just make sure or approve the decisions that were made at the committee level. So I think really the meat for BRN meetings tend to be the committees. So they have an incentive of noticing them.
And actually, if I may, that's actually the model CalPERS uses. They will have their first day with committee meetings in sequence. And the fact is that the board members themselves who are part of the committee have that meaningful conversation, but the board members who are interested in a particular issue or agenda item are there to be able, and they can participate as during the committee's discussion, not just as public testimony. But they are publicly noticed. Their whole agenda packet is published, legally, and uploaded onto the web. And that's worked really well for PERS. And that's also, the staff has been able to provide that packet of information because it's regularly scheduled. I mean, the staff can provide any information that the board asks for. It's just that for planning purposes, it's just good to have that calendar. So that's actually a fairly solid model. It's harder, I think, for this board to do it all in one bang because of the disciplinary hearings. So the BRN model actually might be one you want to look at if you want to go that direction, to have the committees meeting at this point, and then at a different week having the board meet itself.
Yeah, if I can add to the Board of Registered Nursing model, the way they do it is so you have that 1 month where they do all the committee meetings, and then a month later they have a 2-day board meeting. The first day is all disciplinary issues, and then the second day is all business, which is usually just taking up the items that were already discussed at the committee level.
What are the implications with the bill that we're going to discuss later on?
Oh, SB 53?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not my place to discuss legislation, but I'm sure we'll have really meaningful
What are the
conversations.
implications? Are there any implications?
Yeah, I think it's about making sure that committee meetings, regardless of the number of members that sit on it, need to be subject to Bagley-King. So even if you have a 2-member committee, I think it means that you have to publicly notice it.
That's correct. Our understanding of that bill is, in this context, we would still be, whether the board decides to go in this one committee day model or continue in that path, but we still need to have public notice of a committee that consists of more than 2 people, or 2 or more people rather. And that, of course, assumes that bill is chaptered. But I think the implication here is that this actually might make that easier to comply with, should that bill be enacted. If we're having everybody there, and at a certain point, if we have to notice a meeting with 2 people, we've always kind of structured our committees to be 2 people, so that we would have that flexibility in scheduling and implementing meetings. Well, if everything needs to be out in that public meeting section, we can have more board members participating in meetings and having those bigger conversations, and so consequently, that actually might facilitate a lot of things.
So what would be the number of board members to satisfy the
Currently, it would be more than 2 members meeting to conduct business would require a notice.
Okay.
That's correct.
Under the proposed law, any meeting of a committee would require notice, in essence.
And we can go up to what number?
Any of them.
Our board.
Well, you could have a committee that's the full board if you wanted, and that's up to the board itself and the executives committee to make those appointments. There's nothing in our statute, if that's what you're asking, that limits it.
So I don't know if this part we're asking questions are pros and cons, but obviously having all these committee meetings right before the board meeting, like the day before, how are they accomplishing seeing the minutes, committee seeing the minutes, reviewing the minutes, correcting the minutes, and having them in time for the board meeting? So that's an issue. And then also sometimes there are topics that require research, and I suppose we could carry that business over to the following board meeting instead of the upcoming board meeting. As an example, default delegation, we wanted to go back and see, well, how many times have board members voted or not voted differently on delegation? And we wanted to add that to the report. So if we had a meeting right before, the day before, there wouldn't be time to incorporate that information.
Sure. Just a couple comments on that. I think for Board of Registered Nursing, as an example, these are full committee days, and they only have 4 committees. So if you have a meeting 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., that's usually a lot enough time to cover 4 committees, multiple hours. And then regarding the minutes, I think boards kind of do it differently, but I think it's my understanding that I think staff kind of remind board members to make sure to read or go over the minutes before the meetings, and then provide their comments or about potential changes at the meeting. And so usually all the board members already have a list in front of them when the meeting starts about, I want to change these 3 things on the minutes, and then they would go board by board. And so usually the minute edits portion doesn't exceed 5 or 10 minutes if everyone comes prepared at a time.
And the research issue.
Research issue, I think it really depends on what kind of research and how is staff assigned to it. But I think if the committee is very clear about what are the expectations of the research, you can list out, here are 3 questions that we want to resolve. Staff will go offline, do the research, present it at the committee meeting, and the board can ask questions and make edits there. This is where the delegation model is actually really effective, because when the board really struggles with particular policy issues, they can appoint experts in the topic that do really thorough research on the particular topic. So usually when it comes to the committee meeting, they're really prepared. They know, what kind of questions to expect, etc.
General question about the experts.
Mm-hmm.
They might be identified by application or other means. What kind of compensation would one expect as an expert, and how do the boards you study handle that?
I believe the compensation is deep gratitude for their public service. And I'm fairly sure that these are volunteer positions. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question, but it's not really directed at you because you may not be familiar with it, but the Strategic Outreach Committee, wasn't that a committee that was recommended by our monitor? Or is that something
Not
that...
specifically.
No?
Not specifically. And you'll have to forgive me if I'm a little sketchy on the actual details. In fact, actually.
Origin came originally out of strategic plan. There had been a former plan before the current plan, and in response to some of the items there, that was recommended. That committee did not get structured, or did it become active until the current plan that we are now working on updating went into effect. Interestingly enough, as I'm saying this, many of the committees, and I'm thinking, yes, there's a large number of them, were supposedly identified based on goals in the strategic plan. Given that, one of the recommendations, or let me call them takeaways by our presenters, that there be fewer, it might be a discussion point for us. How do you combine some of the goals so not to have a committee for each of the critical goal areas?
Well, that's kind of what I'm thinking about. If we're aiming to have fewer committees, as Patrick was explaining, some of these committees, the staff people, strategic outreach, Vicki took it and ran with it. And so could it be that we not have a specific committee for that, but maybe a liaison to staff?
I think actually Patrick had alluded to that, if you don't mind my jumping in on that. Patrick had alluded to that model, that I think based on BVNPT's structure, should the board itself designate a board member to work with staff on a specific project, that would probably fit that model.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Just an observation. I think what's going to be very helpful for us is the information that was shared, thank you very much, and that we take it into consideration, particularly as we look at what is the purpose of this board, what are we charged to do, and ultimately what will we decide or accept as our future strategic plan.
So one of the
And so having points of discussion and thinking about this with the kinds of questions we're asking will help our later discussion and decision making. Sorry for that.
No, actually,
That was a great segue.
So before we came here today, we got with Elaine and Vicki and said, well, what are some of the committees that should be or maybe are around? So this is kind of the list that we came up with. One of the things to think about is, like Patrick mentioned, which one of these get the most work or whatever. So just as a group, if you were to look at this and prioritize these, what do you think is like the most important committee we should have, and just maybe we'll prioritize them?
Just a question.
Yeah.
Does this assume there's an executive committee or there is no executive
We
committee?
can add one if you'd like.
No, it's just a question.
That's for you all to decide. So I don't know the answer because,
So, but I did hear you say, I believe I heard you say, this is what you got in terms of a discussion with staff. So an executive committee is not listed, right?
that is true.
Okay, thank you.
No, but actually, the staff's assumption was that there was an executive committee.
Okay.
Thank you, that's
Yeah.
helpful. That's
Thank you,
extremely
boss.
helpful.
You bet. But, because,
It would be a body that has
Can we add
substantial work,
executive committees?
right?
Always
Have
busy.
substantial work,
Yes.
so it should be
Quite a
part
bit.
of this slide.
We're happy to let someone else do that. The guidance.
So then we have 6 committees here. So,
The one that I see gets a lot is the education. Education is a tremendous amount of work.
everybody agree with that? That the education, and then, well,
And
Mike?
The other part of education is that for the schools, there are, in essence, hearings that provide the schools with due process so that their issues can be addressed in an open meeting, and then it's then taken up based on recommendations by the committee at the full board meeting. I think it serves an essential due process function that couldn't be handled efficiently at the full board meeting.
Okay, so possibly, okay. And we're going to look at these in more detail. So just, I kind of want to get an idea, where should we get started?
Just a follow-up, that actually happened as a recommendation from the full board, asking that the education committee take on more in terms of helping it get its business done. Or else we would need to, as a board, meet for more than 2 or 3 days just to get through the issues around schools and other licensure. Well, not licensure, but issues that affect the licensees, hearings in other words.
And then how about like a second, or let me ask you this, are these in an order that you feel like that if we went through this order, just feel like the order of working?
I think I'm part of the licensing, and I always thought our agenda, just from what we learned today, that our agendas were a little
Light.
short or
Little light?
a little light. Thank you very much. I was trying to figure out a good term. But yes, a little light. And so I would lower licensing, or maybe combine it with enforcement. I don't know how enforcement is with the scope of work that they're doing.
What is the scope of work for, on the enforcement? Is it a light load? Is it not a light load?
It hasn't been yet.
Has not been a light load, so it's been a normal, regular?
I think it's changed, and it's because we've increased our staffing to actually help them, we've got new hires and stuff. So I think that's changed a lot. But I still think it should be probably number 2.
Okay.
And if you combine it with licensing and evaluations, that's up to the rest of the board, but I definitely believe that enforcement should be number 2, the legislative and the regulations number 3, and licensing and strategic outreach. I think executive, that's one of,
executive's a
it's a
different animal.
unique committee.
I'm wondering if legislative and strategic outreach could be somewhat combined, because your legislative, you're talking to the legislators and about issues with the board. Strategic outreach, you're talking to like the schools and getting information and input from them and promoting the board.
That's,
So,
if you're asking me,
I'm asking.
What is everyone's
What
thoughts?
they thought. It's a rhetorical question.
Well, no, what-
I don't know if it's rhetorical. I think it was like,
No,
what do
that's
you all
actually-
think of that idea?
Yeah.
but,
Well reasoned.
I think legislation is part of outreach.
John's on
It's just a
both.
different body that you're
Yeah.
outreaching to.
It might be the strategic outreach and then under with the legislative and out to the schools and
that's interesting.
maybe.
Well,
Because-
I don't know, but
legislative
that's,
regulations mean we're helping to draft, review and draft language. But how often do we do that? I don't know. I mean, we're working on it right now. Legislation, obviously, we have to monitor.
Well, if I may, and actually, that's a very good point, and another way of looking at that, of course, is rather than having a specific leg and regs committee, you divvy out the pertinent legislation and regulations to the policy-based committees so that they're shaping those proposals based on a policy standpoint. And then if you went to the model that I think Tammy is referring to and kind of combining some functions of strategic outreach and legislation, then that committee is focusing more on the operational side of, crafting the legislation itself and pursuing, the advocacy of that. So that's another way of looking at it. I mean, not that I think that's the best way of doing it, but one of the things that a number of board members mentioned when we were doing the SWOT analysis was that there was a real interest in other board members being able to participate more on the legislative, or at least learning more about the process and being more involved in that for BVNPT. So that is, of course, one way of pursuing that. The benefit of breaking it out is, as I said, you get more of the people thinking policy. How does this impact BVNPT on a policy level? Whereas on the current model where you have a specific committee, you think more on that craft level of, is this sound, structurally sound? Is this going to work? Is this legally correct, if you will? And then, of course, that political thing of how do we get this, how do we advance whatever position? So, I mean, there's a couple ways of looking at that.
Well, what about?
One is not necessarily better than the other.
Okay, so what about legislation comes to the legislation regulation committees, they review it, which they're already doing, and instead of just coming straight to the board making recommendation, how about they start to refer it after they've reviewed it to the various committees that it could be impacted by, and then those committees can take a look at it and weigh in on it if you want to add the extra step.
Yeah.
Or it can just go to the board, and those people that are on the committees can, as they do now, weigh in from the perspective of each of their other committees.
May I? If we met monthly, that would be a really good model. Since we don't, just for the purposes of the legislative calendar, that would be hard because we would probably miss a lot of the deadlines. The regs, that's not so much the case. I think the regs, that would probably work better. But it's just in terms of being able to respond nimbly to legislation, the calendar works against us on that. But I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying that the calendar would work against us on that.
It seems it's consistent that they have that committee with every
Yes.
agency group that we've looked at.
I would suggest, given the fact that you just, the time, I suggest that committee be on its own so that they have the flexibility to meet urgently or, to make sure that they follow the timeline of when it's in session, when something comes up new or not. And I wouldn't add an extra step to divvy it out to a subcommittee.
No.
I would take it straight to the board, just because I just feel like legislation seems to me to be the thing that we have no control over the timing. Time is against us, and we need to be like really focused on the bills that are happening. What do we need to review? What do we need to create? What do we need to write? And timing. this might be one, and, you know, looking at the BRM, like, they have it on their own, it's just legislative committee.
So,
And
how do we feel, just on all that discussion, how do we feel about combining the legislative and the outreach? Do you feel like that's a good idea? We've had some discussion, but where do people land on that idea of combining them?
Well, I think to the extent that Ms. Mendoza had said that the committee needs to start outreach maybe to the legislatures, but that's not necessarily the same as outreaching to the schools or to the general public.
So we can separate that?
So to that extent, maybe it's separate.
Do we need a committee that outreaches to schools?
Well,
We do?
Huge constituency group.
how often talking about Patrick? Talking about Patrick's comment, is there enough stuff in outreach that is meaningful, that's substantial, and that happens on a regular basis?
The strategic outreach with education, since the focus is the schools.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we don't just have with what Cheryl was saying, underneath each one, have all the various committee members possibly do some outreach, like when we have the board meetings, let them know, because they'll be able to see who the board members are on those committees. If they have questions about the committees, maybe that's where we do some of the outreach, or when, like Bernice did, what was it, last year? When you had held those meetings?
Oh,
For
we actually had outreach meetings, but that was the result of the mandate to review the scope of practice for PTs and LVN. And so we did run question and answer input meetings north and south.
So then, is that a good, to combine the strategic outreach with education that somebody mentioned? Is that one more likely?
Well, no, what I was thinking is under each committee, as a sub.
A sub,
Not necessarily a subcommittee, but a sub-task.
So
Per se.
every committee's charge would
Would
include,
include strategic outreach.
there you go. There you go.
that's okay.
Versus
Okay,
having
that's-
a set committee just doing that.
I see.
And then back to, I think, Alita's point of when there was something, a large kind of overarching board-wide process, that the executive committee could designate a board member to work specifically with staff on advancing that, and it'd probably be a lot of shepherding from the other parts as well.
Because like
It could easily be.
posting on the Facebook page or all of that, that could come from each committee to Vicki
Mhm.
directly or to
Absolutely.
So then, are
the
we saying,
staff.
so then we could take strategic outreach off, knowing, and then you'll see in the upcoming slides, when we look at each committee, we're going to have what the functions are of that committee. The function of each of these committees remaining would be strategic outreach. Is that what that's okay. So then for fun, can we go ahead and we're going to remove it here. We made the note here, so we don't lose it, and you'll see it as we go through some of the slides. So looking at these five, do these five look like the education, licensing, evaluation, legislative, regulation, enforcement, and executive? Are these the five committees, five, am I counting right? Yep, five committees that we're thinking are good for the board, or do we need to make any changes to what we see?
I suggest merge licensing. I'm not sure who's on evaluation. I don't know what evaluations is. I don't know that, but I know licensing needs to be merged because it was.
So who's on the evaluation committee now? Because you made the comment, I'm not sure what it is. So what, just kind of a nutshell, is there enough regular substantial work?
Well, actually, I was chairing that committee, that's why my.
Oh, I'm sorry, I saw both of you.
Yeah, we were colleagues together on
So,
that committee.
Is there enough to a regular business, or could it be combined with the licensing?
It changed and staffing changed. And so the priorities and how it's tied to the strategic goals changed. We're putting new strategic goals potentially in place. So the purpose of evaluations, and I'm looking at my colleague, could very well change because we don't have those goals there. Initially, that committee was designed to address all of the issues related to evaluating everything that went on. And it was kind of like an over piece. It got focused, I'm not going to say unfortunately or not, but the reality, it got focused on telephone and communications, and it kind of stayed there without dealing with the other components.
If it were to work with the other components, do you feel like that would be a regular, ongoing, substantial, meaningful business, or could it be knowing?
From reality, if we are not evaluating or, let's say, assessing our functionality, how do we know we're doing good business?
So then,
And that's a question.
so then there, and I'm still a little lost.
That's kind of like, that's an answer, but
It
it
might
might be important as a function under all of the committees.
So do we feel like strategic outreach and evaluations could be a part of the education, licensing, and legislative and enforcement?
And I really believe evaluations is not the term. It might be assessment and evaluations, or assessment, because that helps drive home the definition and purpose.
So before we move on to the naming, we're still finding out, should it be combined or should it be a part of?
So, question about assessment or evaluation. I'm wondering if that could be something like, I guess, ad hoc committee that is put in place to evaluate a specific area of scope of work, or where the body of the board sees an assessment needed and an ad hoc subcommittee is created. Because, for example, if it took the focus of customer service and calls, it was because there was concern, right? And
our monitor said there's huge
concern, right? And so but maybe once, I know that at the last board meeting, we had a favorable report of our customer service calls. Then at that point, you would close the ad hoc subcommittee on that specific topic, and you open it once you see
Something
a gap or a void.
So how do we feel about that? So maybe something what we might be doing is taking the licensing and evaluations, breaking it apart. Evaluations would become its own committee, but an ad hoc committee that only forms when needed to resolve the conflict. Oh wait, actually,
Well, I just wanted to make a comment that from the staff perspective, that the information that they compile for the evaluations committee is also information that they compile. That's correct, Jen? So,
compile for licensing too, or?
is it licensing? Yes.
Okay.
So that makes sense.
Oh, to combine.
Yes.
But, if I may, I think that the point that Bernice was trying to make in that evaluating and assessing the work should be part of a specific area, should be part of every committee's job.
Yes.
And I think that actually makes a great amount of sense. I didn't want to get too deep in the weeds about each particular committee just yet, but I think, as we've been talking about what a committee does, to me, that is exactly what a committee does.
about accountability.
Yes.
And then, as Paula was saying, when the issue arises to the point where we need to have that, we can create, kind of like the strategic outreach, that we would have another ad hoc committee just work on one specific issue.
Certainly.
For whichever committee is, or whichever issue is there.
Absolutely.
Okay, so then it becomes evaluation is a part of all the subcommittees, but when a specific thing comes about, then a new ad hoc committee forms to address that bigger issue to some. All right, so then.
Can I ask a question before we move on, though?
Yep.
Just so I'm clear. Evaluations, in the general sense, applies to any of the policy areas. But is there a particular sense that evaluations is used here when it's linked with licensing? that
There was.
encompass things like equivalency?
Exactly.
Okay, yeah. So there is an element to evaluation, I think, that belongs with licensing. And evaluation is a function, I think, of all policy committees, but there's a specific sense of evaluation that's used in connection with licensing that involves equivalency, if I'm not mistaken.
So then keeping it licensed.
But what I was thinking, we would still, I mean, you could still have that portion of it with licensing, but each committee should still do that. And maybe evaluation wouldn't be the name of that ad hoc committee that comes up
We could actually
when there's
call
an
it the
issue.
assessment, we could call it assessment. Would
Well-
assessment work for bringing it home?
Well, when you actually define the scope of each committee.
Oh, that's true.
It would include each, pertinent
Yeah.
piece. So that, yes, it would incorporate the equivalency functions as well as the other license and customer service
Yeah.
that the licensing division performs.
So I think we have a rough idea of, these are roughly the 5 committees we're looking at. Evaluations and strategic outreach would go under each one. Evaluations might be ad hoc. I think what we can do is we can break into each one, and if we go to the next slide, I think you'll see kind of idea. Hopefully it will be education. Let's go to education, that's what I'm reading.
Nope.
All right.
There we go.
So kind of what we were thinking is we would come up with a purpose, a function, and the functions we've already identified 2 evaluations and strategic outreach. Talk about maybe the frequency. We've hit a little bit about that, about the ad hoc. So if we were looking at the education committee, just think of like one sentence or even one word. Swift and short is what we're looking at. What's the purpose of the education committee? And whoever's on the education committee can maybe actually come up with a sentence, and we'll all agree to it. And you know what? No, we're gonna. When you see typos up here, we're just brainstorming, so don't worry about getting it perfect. We'll make it perfect together as a team.
It's that valuation of educational facilities that serve the constituents of the board.
How do we feel about that? Does everybody feel like, yeah, that's what we do? Does anybody feel like there's something we should add to it? Maybe a word change that better encapsulates what we do? Or do we feel like that's it?
Well, it's not just facilities, it's programs and facilities.
Yeah, programs.
Okay, so programs, educational programs. Educate facilities and programs, or just
Programs
programs?
needs to be first, it's really,
Yeah.
Does that include personnel?
maybe it should just read evaluation of educational programs.
So that's
remove
encompassing.
facilities
It
as
is
well?
encompassing.
Okay. Perfect. Evaluation of educational programs that serve the constituents of the boards. All right. All right, that's cool. So that's kind of what we're going to do for each of the committees. So then the function, can we write strategic outreach and evaluation? And we're just going to bullet point or just list them with comma. So that is strategic outreach, evaluations would be one. Is evaluation singular or plural? I'm still not sure on that. Plural. Okay, evaluations. And then what are the other functions? And this could be functions that we're going to review reports. We're going to look at report or cases. What I don't know. You tell me. What have we got? Think about.
Program, well, you have evaluation up there, but program assessment is a big part
Okay,
of it.
let's put program assessment.
And scope of practice entry in both.
So scope of practice.
And I think part of our function is to educate, on a broader sense, we certainly spend time educating the schools about our expectations and.
Can we put? Oh, okay.
But
education.
even more than schools, maybe just public education for example.
The public would be more inclusive.
Okay.
Public education.
Educating the public.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was saying, okay, I think that's probably better wording, educating the public,
Yeah.
because I was like, it might people, yeah, perfect.
Because public education is delivery of.
Yeah, yeah, educating the public.
Yeah.
What else might there be, and if staff wants to chime in too?
Also making decisions on the provisional
approvals, and then you're passing that on to
Making recommendations.
Right.
Mhm.
So what would that wording be?
Making recommendations to the board. Yes.
Well, it's responding to the request of recommendations from the board. The board could change
So responding
what
and
they
making-
are asking for recommendations.
All right, so we're going to
about.
put responding and making recommendations to the board?
I think another thing is follow-up, like this whole thing with Brightwood College, we did a lot of follow-up with that to see was the plan that was suggested being implemented and how is it going?
So would it be follow-up or just follow-up on the implementation plans or?
It's an oversight function, really, I think.
Oversight is broader and more inclusive.
Mhm.
Do you want to do follow-up / oversight? Would that help or hurt? Oversight's fine, I'm just throwing it out.
Sure, follow-up and oversight, but oversight is the broader term.
That's really what we're doing.
And from an educational perspective, more meaningful to the schools and programs we work with.
Okay, and then were you going to say something? I don't know your name. Yeah. Okay.
She's just coaching.
I wanted to make sure you didn't get lost. You had a genius idea.
With,
Yeah, thank you so much. That does say staff can make contributions.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you,
You're welcome.
thank you.
There you
Please speak.
There you go. They will.
Right, are we missing anything? Anything to
well,
add?
the element of responding and making recommendations to the board, that relates to programs. So in essence, you're hearing and considering essentially staff recommendations about programs, making a determination, and then make a recommendation to the board. So it's really keyed in on programs, specific programs.
So what should it?
Responding and making recommendations to the board regarding programs.
Oh, okay, regarding, okay, thanks.
It's
I
specific
see what you're
to
saying.
programs.
Thanks.
I see what you're saying.
I think one of the functions that we haven't done is really highlighting what is success in regards to education and within, across the state of
So
California.
maybe identifying success, program success measurements, or would it be just identifying success measurements?
But we could use that, we can define that as the evaluations on the program assessment, couldn't we? Or is that?
Outreach.
Or outreach. Are there, is there something,
Spotlight on a program.
something specific that's not falling in those buckets?
No, I just think, what we haven't done, and it's not, I think we've been working on a lot of other things, but I think it's really just highlighting the schools and individuals that should be highlighted across the state.
That's fair.
Recognition.
Recognition.
Oh, there you go.
Because success measurements are highlighted in the nurse
Granted,
practice.
yep.
So,
So are we keeping identifying success measurements and adding?
No, let's delete that and just put recognizing, or recognizing.
Okay, okay. Any other goodies we should add to the pile? And then anything, think of that word substantial business, meaningful business that comes the way. Is there any, have we missed anything?
It's very busy.
So knowing that, on the frequency, knowing it's very busy, how often should this committee meet?
quarterly is going to work.
There have been times when we've met monthly.
Yeah.
And it has a lot to do with the number, and I'll just use the term cases, but programs that come before the board.
So do you think
It-
bi-monthly, every other month, or quarterly, weekly?
One might say, according to the frequency and case load. That's kind of hard to define, but it has been
So,
substantial and it's been regular.
so if it's been substantial and regular,
I would
Oh.
like to hear from you.
what was that? So monthly is too much. So are you thinking
Actually,
maybe,
if I could,
yeah?
I think to your point, driving it by the workload, it goes the other way as well, because if we have a calendar, the staff works to the calendar. So that if you set a meeting to say quarterly or bi-monthly, we are then able, I think the staff is better able to just say, okay, this set of schools goes on this agenda, and they're able to plan forward on the production of each informational
That's the
packet.
efficiency of
Could staff make a recommendation
My
of like,
recommendation would be it follows the pattern of the board meeting.
So quarterly.
No quarter, I think anything more than that.
With the option of
Right.
So let's put quarterly.
I think we've met, when it was necessary to, to use as a statement. We meet when it's important, in addition to the days
There you
when
go.
we have to. So I think if we do what we've been doing, which is
Quarterly
typically
plus.
quarterly, but when necessary, we call the meeting to.
So could it be quarterly, more often as needed?
yes.
Yeah.
That's what I was
So
considering.
let's do that. So quarterly or more often as needed.
killers?
Yeah.
It would be really.
And so thinking about these quarterly meetings, are they 8-hour meetings, 4-hour meetings? How
For
long
about
are they?
2, 3,
Huh?
2 to 3.
2 to 3? Should they be more, or is that work? Okay.
Instead of the school.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we have used all 4,
Well,
not
then-
always.
How about up to 4? Does that work?
Yeah, sure.
This way it gives us,
But
I think that's hard to put in a frequency, in my opinion, because if there's a level of work that needs to be done for the state of California, there shouldn't be a time put on that.
so
right?
think of it as more of a minimum time. So we probably have enough workload to regularly meet quarterly. We might have more workload. But it goes to, and to Elaine and others point that efficiency point, if we can establish some kind of regular schedule, at least it helps with the efficiency of creating materials. That's the thinking.
Yeah, I think
It's your all's
just the only
decision.
reason to do that would be so that we didn't just put a mammoth agenda together. We would be able to pace it out in more realistic.
Your staff wouldn't do that anyways, right?
No, of course not.
Right.
Of course not.
But you could also look at, it, that may be the minimum amount of hours, but depending on what the workload is at that time, because you may have 5 schools, but based on those 5 schools, you may only get through 2 schools,
That's true
based
too.
on the issues that they have.
We've had that happen.
That's
I mean,
absolutely
That
true.
is why we
Because
ended
there
up
could be,
doing monthly.
there could be a tremendous amount of public comment. The board members themselves could have a lot of questions, and there could be that back and forth, especially if one of the NECs is making let's just say, a
Less
contentious
desirable.
So then,
recommendation.
is it maybe
So, yeah,
safer just to leave the hours off? And just-
I would
That's what
prefer that.
Okay, let's do quarterly or more often as needed.
What's your quarterly of minimum?
All right.
At least quarterly.
Okay, so how about at least quarterly or more often as needed? We're cool with that?
I'm good with that.
And then now the next fun part is, how many committee members do we want on this committee?
Well, we have had this committee as a public meeting, which means we can have 3 or more. So truthfully, as many board members as
I guess-
functional.
We were actually a public meeting even when there were only 2,
So
because of
who,
the nature.
what name should we be putting?
Well, there's only one board member who must sit on that
The
one.
educator.
And who is that? Is that you?
The
Okay,
nurse-
and what's your,
The nurse educator.
Is our
It's a title.
Carol.
The nurse
We got
educator.
it.
It's not
Oh,
a
yeah.
person's name. It's the nurse
Nurse
educator. And it happens to be our current nurse educator
Okay.
is.
Yes,
You're correct.
yes.
all right. And then any other person, title, name, whichever that should be on
No, that's just
No,
the way it
that's-
draws.
The way that it goes is then whoever expresses interest would be appointed to the board, or to the, not to the board, to the
here?
committee.
Does somebody want to express interest and can we at least get their names up? So
Do you want to do that right now, or should we wait and see the whole context?
I was thinking we'd wait until we see the whole context. I know
Okay.
That way people can
see
Yeah.
what they're
So-
getting
Wednesday,
themselves into.
okay,
Well,
so
yeah.
then we're gonna go, so just make sure I understand, we're gonna go through and do this for each of the boards, these 3, and then we'll come back and maybe assign some tasks or at a later date, or do you all want to assign the individuals today before we leave?
I
wanna-
think that we want to get the interest,
Okay, first,
Yeah.
okay,
at least that.
Yeah, and then we'll balance it
Because we have
later.
2 board members that,
Right, that's right.
okay. So, for fun, can we copy strategic outreach and evaluations, and you, I think you said licensing was the second most important, which one did you?
no, enforcement.
I would say
Enforcement. I hear, Let's go to enforcement, that's where we are.
Yeah.
And then can we paste the strategic outreach in the functions? So, like we did on the last one, what's the purpose of enforcement?
If I could jump on that. The enforcement committee oversees all of our work in terms of making sure that our licensees are following the law, so that all the disciplinary functions, and Candace, you want to hop in anytime you want. So essentially we have five programs in the enforcement division, and they're all kind of linked together. But up to this point, the enforcement committee has mostly looked at our stats. Where we hope to go from there is, I think, being able to provide a little bit more, guidance and feedback and the outside eyes as we go forward in for example, updating the disciplinary guidelines. Anytime we talk about other standards and particularly problematic processes. So what we want a committee to be able to do is to provide that kind of support and outside kind of checking, if you will.
How does this oversee all the work, making sure licensees are following the law, looking at staff, providing guidance?
But looking at, not just looking at the statistics, but I think evaluating the trends, looking at those trends and finding
evaluating statistical trends?
There you go. That would work for her.
Can we put something in there about public protection?
Thank you.
Protect Californians?
I think it's important to consider that much of the work that the enforcement committee has been doing is minutes and so forth. Sorry.
There you go.
As usual. Thank you. Is related to the monitor's recommendations and workflow and structure and so forth. And now that we're kind of getting a handle on that and things are leveling out, I see that diminishing over time.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good point. Although I think to go back to what I think we briefly touched on today and more in May was, the board is looking at, I think, a fairly interesting agenda in terms of enforcement for the strategic plan. So obviously the job of the committee would be to make sure that we're meeting those goals.
Implement strategic plan goals.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Does that work?
Absolutely.
So we'd have implement strategic planning goals. We can do another we'll do another section, but we'll clean it up and make it all nice, see that. Sounded good.
That was kind of a football goals.
So is that a good summary of what so when I'm on the enforcement committee, this is kind of our purpose, why we exist?
Also, I guess it would go under the outreach would be, because initially where enforcement started out was that we had a huge backlog.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so that's where it started out to create the relationships between the board and DOI, looking at sending some of the historic cases to see and have them work through and closed out. So probably another part of this would be for them to continue that relationship. To
Would that be a function? Foster the relationship with DOI?
Yeah, that's why I said it's probably kind of under the outreach, but we want to make sure that it
doesn't get forgotten.
Yeah.
So foster relationship with DOI.
Actually, it's broader than that.
Can we add with DOI and OAG, Office of Attorney General?
It's even broader than that, because one of the things that Candace has done a tremendous amount of work is building partnerships with other healing art board enforcement, and as well as the other parties we work with. So basically developing partnerships so that we can help each other to provide case enforcement, case management.
To provide case management, did you want those words in?
No, no,
Okay,
but,
just want to make sure.
That includes other government agencies as well.
Okay.
yeah, perfect.
Oh, yeah, yeah, good point. Are you saying the partnerships does, or we should add other government
Oh.
agencies?
The partnership.
Okay. So we don't need other government agencies? or-
No.
Oh, okay, okay, I'll get it right. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, that kind of got lost, case management. For some reason, it feels like it needs to be there because the recommendation from the consultant was a lot about case
Could we do-
management.
Oh, yeah.
But at this
Wherever
point-
you're gonna put it.
But see, at this point, it's more oversight of the case management.
Right.
It's looking to see how the units are moving all the cases through. So
However
yes.
we use it.
Yes,
So
but-
that case management appears so that
And that's a task.
everyone
Fair enough.
knows
Fair enough.
we are on task.
Yeah, no, and that, because essentially what you could take these do is turn these into standing agenda items of what's the
Mhm.
update on these things. So.
Did you have something?
Yeah, I'm just looking at our last licensing committee agenda, and really what I see here, like, we only had one agenda item, and that was review, the licensing division performance measures and stats, which is really what the enforcement is doing, to review enforcement statistical reports and monitor workload trends.
Do we want to put that in there? Review?
I just feel like, coming from the licensing committee, I feel like
You already have that.
we handle that, but maybe we combine it here. I know that the enforcement has a big workload, but it's already the same reports, right?
Yeah,
Or are the
It's
reports
not.
different?
You're
It's
talking
not
about
the
two
same.
sets of reports.
There are two sets of.
Two sets of reports, because one is the case management stats, and one is the licensing and customer service stats.
So we added
But do
reduce.
we need a whole committee to review?
Well, when
Well,
we
we
get
can-
there,
let's get to that
there's
one.
other things that are gonna be
Yeah.
added in
So-
there that were under something else.
Okay.
So for enforcement, we're thinking maybe include review statistical reports and monitor trends?
It's already under the purpose, so I don't know.
Or we could put both, like, it's a task that we would do
It is a
It
task.
is a task.
It is a task that the committee would do.
or function.
I think you should specifically mention CPEI.
Oh, the CPI, Consumer Protection Enforcement Initiative.
Because it's statutorily mandated, I think it should be in there somewhere.
All right. Any other
Good catch, Ken.
functions that you think should be added? I think-
Did we get everything in the statute? Kim? Is that anything else from the statute?
I'd like to make a,
Yeah.
we can tinker with the wording a little bit to mirror the statute, but that's something to relate. I think it captures this.
So then, thinking about that, how substantial is the business, how regular does it occur, how meaningful is it, what kind of frequency are we looking at?
What's that?
Candace has a thought.
What is not in there are those, and I think it's particularly important right now because we have a number of them that are kind of just waiting for an enforcement committee to get rolling again, but there are a number of meaty issues that we want to bring before the committee. I don't, well, yeah.
How about policy?
Emerging policy issues.
Oh, emerging policies. Oh, that's.
So that's, I mean, I think that it's important that that's there. And I don't know if, as far as frequency goes, this may be a situation where, the first year we have a lot on the agenda, but that may diminish over time as well, so that you would want it to decrease the frequency or even.
Well, let's schedule for like the first year, the frequency, and then as you guys meet, as you all meet, you can always adjust it.
Readjust.
What should it be that first year?
Reassess.
Can I suggest quarterly, and then if they need more, at least we have something that is there, that if there's nothing to meet on, you can defer the meeting.
Yeah.
But I believe that with the issues that we have, it would be at least quarterly, if not,
More often
More
as needed,
often.
like we did on the previous one?
That's right.
but, I know that at least quarterly, there'll be enough to review and go through.
So all right, so quarterly or more, we're humming along nicely, which is great. we have, what, 3 more to do? So shall we, any particular, did you want to do licensing and evaluation, since there seems like some stuff is falling under there? Yeah.
I have a comment before you move on.
Yeah.
Should this be public notice? Right now it is. But based upon, not just because of what's going on with the bill, but just in general, I think it would be a good idea to put on the public notice.
This committee?
Yes.
Ah,
I'm saying
I would
for
rather
each
not.
committee. I'm just saying for each, not
Oh,
just
for each
the-
committee,
for
certainly.
each committee,
Yeah.
yes.
put it down here.
I agree with you there.
Whether or not it.
But for this
should-
committee itself, no, it really can't be a public
That's
committee.
fine. I'm just saying that I think it's a good idea to put on each committee
Public or,
description, whether it's public or not.
That's
what's
fair.
the opposite kind of there's public and closed?
All the meetings are public.
Okay, and then what if
The
it's,
question is whether it has to be noticed and an
Or-
agenda posted.
it's more like we
Ah.
wanted to notice whether it's open or closed, we can,
It's not closed, but.
Closed is a term of art on a regular meeting, and so any member of the public can attend any of the committee meetings. They're not closed in that sense. But the question becomes whether you have to agendize it and post the agenda 10 days in advance of the meeting.
so what should, when it
How
comes,
do you code that for the purposes of this? We'll come back to that.
I can tell you under current, the way it's currently structured, the only committee that's required to post an agenda in advance of the meeting is education, and that was done by board motion some time ago.
okay,
So everything else is not, prior notice of the meeting is not required.
all right.
No,
So,
we chose also to make strategic outreach.
Well, that's right,
Yeah.
yeah.
so do we need to put, to your comment, do we need to put in here his comment about public, not public? Or do we just,
All the meetings are public.
since they're all,
I
public.
think, why don't we figure out how to word that and come back to it?
okay,
Yeah,
that's
I
a fair deal.
Probably wouldn't put it in there necessarily.
Just an observation, dependent on how we finally decide to set up our committee meetings. For example, if they all occur within a day or 2 days, one could potentially do notice and actually do public notice. If we do not choose to do that, it wouldn't necessarily work well. So that answer is dependent upon the how we decide to hold committee meetings.
And I think we kind
And
of,
when.
That's a really good point.
we kind of agreed, so you all will work offline to figure out how or what that wording may be. Okay, so let's do the licensing and evaluation one, some of the stuff that's falling there. So I guess we'll put in our standing functions, but from a purpose perspective, what, actually, I guess from a name, are we still calling it licensing and evaluations, or does it just need to be licensing if we have evaluations here?
Just licensing.
I hear licensing, going once, going twice. So what is the function, I'm sorry, what is the purpose of the licensing committee?
I like to hear from the staff.
Let me make a stab, and then I'll let Jen provide more expert wording.
Guidance.
This committee provides oversight to our licensing functions, our licensing and, the equivalency functions. So then, like enforcement, it looks at the programs, the trends, the statistics, and provides the staff with some policy guidance and suggestions.
Did you have anything to add to that?
I would like to add, because initially the licensing committee, one of the functions in there was to review and oversee the complaints of the licensing division, and we had not really done that. So I think it's important to put that in.
Okay.
The challenge with that is that if we get a complaint, we want to turn it around and get it resolved within a day or two. So to have to bring it to the committee would be challenging and we wouldn't have that quick response. So if we get a complaint from an assembly member or legislator, general public, DCA.
We handle that in 2 days.
We do. I mean.
I think, do you have something to share?
Yeah, I didn't necessarily mean that, just talking about the trend of the complaints, like the phones, were a big thing.
I see what you're saying.
And just bringing it to the committee saying, hey, the last quarter, these were our.
So we could say complaint trends?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in other words, for example, the beginning of this year, we had the phones off the hook because of the fee implementation, the Brightwood issue, and the DOJ fingerprinting issue. So those 3 issues would create, I think, a trend that we would present to the decision. But since all of them pretty much took care of themselves, I don't know how pertinent, but there are certainly going to be some.
Are there any other purpose, words, statements we should include?
Implement strategic goals.
Okay. Implement strategic plan goals? Yeah.
I went back to look at what was a previous goal, and I'm not sure if it's there, but the purpose ensures that VN and PT applicants and licensees are qualified to provide professional services and are able to expeditiously enter California's workforce.
So I think, so in the strategic plan,
Yeah.
where we put it kind of, that's for the public again, that this is what licensing does. That, or what were you thinking? Okay,
I think that's a better way of expressing those first few points.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So keep this, or use that?
We'll work with the wording in a bit.
Basically, you need to wordsmith what it says up there to
Match that.
be a little more eloquent, I guess.
Oh, yeah,
the
we
way
can do that
want
for
to
sure.
say it.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
That's polite. Thank you.
Yeah.
Nice.
Oh, and that's a great point. So we're capturing the concepts here. We'll clean up the language, and then you all will see the cleaned up language. Yeah. Sure.
I don't know, well, I guess it would go under the function, would be like the CEs and all of that, that would have been under the evaluations.
So continuing
So,
education.
Right.
Yeah, I think that would go under.
I had
function
counted that under
more
programs, but yeah, okay.
That's related to qualified, the qualifications.
Sure.
Anything else? Any other functions that would go under? Yeah.
I think somewhere in the purpose, you have to say something about applicants. I like what you said earlier, because they don't mention applicants.
You're going to do oversight to applicants and licensing functions? Application and licensing functions?
All right. Then
We are responsible for both.
So applications,
And licensing.
application and licensing.
We do, yeah, application.
Well,
Applicants or applications.
Thanks.
there you go.
Any other goodies to add to the function pile?
Function.
I will let, I will pass. I'm good observe. Say it.
I think it's the same. I think it's over.
And one of the things now, just reflecting, that happened previously in evaluations, and it might go here, the chart, the roadmap to licensing was something that was developed by the evaluations committee. Because there was a concern, most people didn't understand how long does it take and where does it go and who reviews it. And it's more than just a process of rubber stamping.
Yeah.
There actually are steps. And so licensing in strategic outreach might also be educating the general public about the license, the application and licensing process.
How do we feel about that? That's a yeah. Educate the public about the licensing and application process.
Says plural.
Any other functions? Any reports to review? Any
How about streamlining processes
streamlined licensing processes?
or monitor the evaluation of
And
OCD?
it's applicant and licensee.
Okay.
Because
Yeah. So applicant and
Well,
we'll clean up the words, yeah.
I don't understand how that committee's gonna do that.
no, the committee doesn't do that. The committee will advise the staff on how to do that.
So advise staff on how to streamline, like, is that,
Yeah.
I still don't understand how they do that. How is the
Well-
committee, like, Ken, so, for example, say, Ken, if you're on that committee, how would you do that? Because that's part of the thing, is we have to have these real world things, these have to be real functions that you are able to do. I mean, putting it up there is one thing, but actually executing that. So
So-
how does that execute? What does that look like to us?
what it would look like would be Jen would bring a process and we'd see if we can work it out. And Jen would tell us whether or not it's workable within the guidelines that they have to go with.
Like, through their current process?
Yes, and maybe see where something could be either done electronically or see if there's a better system to get it to, like,
So you're our cold reader.
huh?
You're the cold reader.
There you go.
Basically.
Well, I
You-
think that it would be more policy guidance than it would be getting into the operational details. So I think we need to focus on at the policy level. Otherwise, it's like reverse delegation, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
so then knowing that we maybe should focus on policy, is this, oh,
There you go.
that's
Way to-
smooth, go Tricia.
As if that's understood.
Yeah,
Yeah, there you go.
Maybe instead of, because I see what Vicky's saying on that, beginning of that sentence, advise staff, maybe it should be like, improve and review the streamline of
There you
processing, so that I can bring it to the committee instead of them advising
oh,
Okay.
okay.
Oh,
staff.
Review and improve, actually.
Take streaming out.
Yeah, take streamline out.
And then somebody said review and then switch review and approve. So
I would change it, yeah.
review first, then approve, yeah.
Right.
All right, that's good.
oh, absolutely.
Approve.
Anything else that should go in the functions?
Emma?
So I really, like, I'm not sure when this document went out, but they had, I apologize, I don't have the date. But the document said, the committee will develop strategies to proactively improve consumer service to mitigate complaints and wait times. Now, to me it seems like that develop strategies is, and improving consumer service, it seems to be missing here, unless I'm not.
Or do you think, I'm just throwing it out there, review and approve licensing and application processes?
I think it kind of does. But if you want to call it out.
I think we really do need to put consumer service here because we forget who we're serving, right? Who are the people that are calling? Who are the people that we are, we look at program trends and statistics. Well, what are those trends and statistics, right?
So how would you work in consumer, like what should that
There
sentence
you
say?
go. You have it right there, Paula. Reviewing through the licensing applicant processes at a policy level to ensure customer satisfaction.
There you go.
Boom.
There's your all-encompassing, because it's for the applicants and the licensees, and it's all the processes that they're doing with licensing, and it's all about the customer satisfaction, correct?
Bingo. Or sounds good to me. Does that work for you?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that if this committee is staying in place, that it's doing substantial work.
Okay, and then does this, based on that, does this feel like that meets that substantial work?
I think
criteria?
that's missing a component on mitigating complaints and wait times.
Okay.
How would this committee help with that, with this?
So then the question is for everybody, how,
Well,
or go for it.
see, there's a problem here. There's an operational problem.
Yes.
There's an operational problem because the committee itself can't mitigate a problem or a complaint. The committee itself can only provide guidance and that cold read for the staff to be able to do so. So, because what Vicki had mentioned earlier is that when we get complaints, they're not sitting for a month, they're not even sitting for a week. When a senator's office calls us, it is settled that day, if we can.
But the committee has never even heard these complaints.
Right,
And
now,
I've been on it for a year, and I
No.
have not heard of one
and
complaint
that's
come
why,
to
because
the committee.
they're asked and answered within a day or two.
Okay, so
Now, we could chart these things and be telling, the committee or the board or whomever, we received X number of referred from the governor's office, the Senate, et cetera. We could be doing that, but the fact of the matter is, the committee itself can only look at that and say, well, how come it took you 7 hours instead of 4? Or did you look at this, or to go the other way of, how is it that we work to make sure that these things don't happen? And unfortunately, that's never going to be the case, because there's always going to be people who say, well, I don't understand why my case took this many days to settle.
Actually,
when
can I
my
interrupt for a
friend did
second?
this. So I think we're kind of getting in the weeds here a little bit, but
I don't think so. I
All
really
right.
think this is an important.
fair enough.
If we are supposed to review and improve, and in a year we have not seen a single complaint come to our discussion, either to our subcommittee or to the board at large, then there's a significant problem here. And if this is the mission of the licensing committee, if we're going to keep this, and this is something that we're going to be reviewing and improving, then we need to know what are we reviewing and improving. It's not that I'm trying to change your process and your course of action, is that we need to know what the problems are in order to review and improve.
So we put like review,
All right.
kind of what you said, a review, a
So-
summary, review, report.
At least you want to report.
Okay.
You at least want to report even if it
Okay.
has to be already acted on before you need something.
Right. Well, first, actually, and Jen just made the distinction that the fact that the licensing committee has not heard about the goldenrods is that most of those cases, and most of the cases we've seen from a legislative office, have all been about equivalency cases, and that would have been referred to the evaluations committee for one. But like I said, there's a real cloud here, and so we're going to figure out a way to make this work for you, I promise. But to mitigate complaints, like I said, the committee itself can't mitigate complaints. The committee itself can only look at the trends, I think, and say, how come there are so many of these, when actually probably the vast majority of these complaints come about through equivalency, and there's just not a lot we can do with that beyond getting rid of that approach to licensure. The only other way to do that is to try more to be more proactive in reaching out to people, saying, before you try to apply through equivalency, here's what you need to know. Here's why, if you apply through the normal channels, you're licensed, you're certified to take the test within a couple of days, as opposed to when you apply through method 3 or method 5, it takes months and months and months to get you cleared. And a vast majority of those issues are the fact that people aren't giving us the right information in a timely basis. And there's a lot of handling matters probably on both sides of the case, but the fact is that short of, I think, better preparing folks who want to apply through method 3, method 5, there isn't a whole lot we can do, besides, of course, as I said, if you want to see a report based on, those cases that have been brought forward and how we resolved them, we can do that, absolutely. That's not a problem. Well,
Do we feel like that?
Jen, of course, might argue.
I just wanted to ask a question. So Paul is absolutely right, that was part of the purpose of the licensing, but we put that under purpose, the second to the last sentence. And then we added it again into function.
So this sentence would be,
So the second to the last sentence says, review and oversee complaint trends in the licensing division.
Yeah.
But then we just added it in function.
So like here under function is we're not even getting a report. So if, I guess what I'm trying to say here is, yes, it's under purpose to review and oversee complaints. How are we going to review and oversee complaints if we never even get a report? So the function is to,
I think Ken
for
has
this,
something.
go ahead.
Receive and review reports on complaint trends.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to get reports on individual complaints, you want
Right.
trends. Because
Right.
policy isn't built on looking at individual cases, it's
Right.
built on the trends.
Can we put, so receive and review report on complaints? Perfect.
On trends.
How do we feel? Does that address your? Do we want any, so that's it?
Now know that this is not going to be a statistically valid report, because it'll be all anecdotal. The best we could probably do is, like the phone staff could keep like a tally sheet on questions they've answered in a given day, week, etc. The evaluators will be marking down things, and of course, I have, and Jen has records of when we've been asked by, say, the governor's office, the department, agency, or legislature. We do, of course, have the list of those issues. So keep in mind that this is not going to be anything that's statistically valid, but it'll be kind of anecdotal, and you'll see that. So trends is kind of a loose word here, but certainly we can show you what's coming in and how they were resolved, and the committee itself can ask questions about how they were resolved and suggest possibly better ways to do it. Is that kind of where you're going?
I think I would love to be in the conversation on how to create a report.
Oh, you bet.
And because there are quantitative reports that are, like you said, statistically significant or, show statistics, and they're qualitative reports. And in order for us to create a qualitative report, you have to look at what is the body of complaints, and then assess what are the metrics that you're going to follow and report on. And now, this could be the committee's charge to create a qualitative report. And I don't know, this is something for the attorney. Again, do we need clearance to review these complaints to create a qualitative report? Or can we review the body of complaints and create these are the metrics that we're going to follow, and the staff is going to collect information on these 5 metrics. So for example, what are the top 5 types of complaints, right? And I don't know. See, there you go. We have 2 types of complaints. I have no idea, right?
Yeah.
And so I would say here is, under function is create a qualitative report through a review of complaints.
That's what you're saying.
So you have to have the metrics that you're following. You can't just
then,
ask the staff like, hey, create a report. Let's look at the body of complaints. Let's assess the metrics, and then create a qualitative report that on a consistent basis is reported on, so that we can see where are we going with this.
And then to answer your question, there's no reason that the committee could not review individual complaints involving licensure except that if it becomes a case later on that the board is
Right.
going to consider it, then it could become an issue.
Yeah.
But safeguards could be taken to redact names
could
and those
certainly
kinds of
redact.
things. And it could, but generally speaking, there's no reason not, that the committee couldn't review the complaints themselves and the responses and the data involved in that. And it would be a rare instance where it would possibly come up as a disciplinary case or a statement of issues or something later on. That it would be a rare case. It could happen, but safeguards could be taken to protect against
So do we feel like,
disqualifying the members because they've already seen information about a case.
do we feel like then if we created a qualitative report to review a body of complaints and then review that report, does that address what we're talking about?
I think you're developing a mechanism more than creating a qualitative report. Because, like I said, there's not going to be like a stats, there's going to be like we received this many reports specifically about somebody's ability to transfer
I have an
their
idea.
education from Canada to the United States.
But this is a rough draft,
Oh,
and at
sure.
any time, the committee can relook at the functions and
Absolutely right.
adjust as needed, correct?
Yeah,
Absolutely
actually,
right.
it's funny you say that. I was
Absolutely
going to say two things. I was going to say this can be streamlined, cleaned up a little bit, but would have, instead of maybe create a little bit initiate like initiate is just to brainstorm and figure out what it is. Would initiate might be a slightly better word
Yeah.
because it doesn't exist now, but create makes it sound like we.
That's fair.
Sure, yeah.
May I ask how often complaints are received regarding one of the...
It's sporadic. We get like 3 in 1 month and then not for a number of months. So there's not even a trend really that I could cite.
Thank you.
But one trend, though, is that the same person may make multiple complaints.
That is true. That is very
And
true.
that could be something that the report captures, right?
Yeah.
So this
As
may
an
not be
example,
There's a certain
It's a
file for
serial
them.
complainer.
So do
There's
we
a
feel
certain
like
file for people like that,
complain to the
yes.
department, to the governor, to the legislature.
Yes.
do we feel like this has captured the functions?
Sure.
All right, I have a proposal for you. We can come back, but it seems like people could use a break. So
Yes.
you want to take like a 10-minute break? Are we cool if we're done by noon?
I think so.
Okay.
They need to order lunch,
Okay.
so.
So how about we're,
And
we'll do a 10-minute break to,
Do we have a legislation code too? Use?
We'll try to find one.
Yeah, we'll find one.
take a break, order lunch, we'll come back.
plug in during the break.
Either that.
Last thing we need to do for licensing is how often is the licensing?
Is that right?
How often does it meet?
Should we do what we did
Yeah, I
before?
don't know what.
Yeah, we should.
I would
I'd vote for that.
Yeah, Jen needed to leave, but I would say at least quarterly.
Quarterly,
That works.
quarterly or more is necessary.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And do we want at least in there?
No, I would say quarterly, more is necessary.
Okay, quarterly.
You should just match, yeah.
So then our next area is, let me get on the next slide, I rearranged.
Okay, so you know what? Oh, there was one committee that wasn't listed that I overlooked it.
All right, so we're
You
gonna.
want to wait until
Yeah,
after?
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, we'll do legislative regulations, we'll do strategic outreach, and then we'll see where we are. And
okay, all right.
so,
Don't let me forget.
legislative and regulations, same thing. We've got our strategic outreach and evaluations, and then similarly, what's the purpose of the legislative and regulations committee? It might have, we have 45 minutes, so.
The purpose is to monitor, to review, to provide recommendations on positions to take regarding the various proposed bills. We also.
So wait, hang on, I want to make
Okay.
sure we catch
Yeah,
that.
let Trish get that.
Okay,
So, okay, positions to take, carry on.
yeah, we'll also seek legislations at times that help, that benefit the board and its stakeholders, or constituents.
We'll work on the stakeholder constituents where we'll
Okay. We'll also review well, sometimes we implement regulations. Other times we will review regulations to see if they need to be updated. We're supposed to also do some sort of outreach regarding legislation.
All right, we do kind of, in the
You
function.
got that already?
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
All right, so how do we feel about this as a draft definition? Is it the final definition? Do we need to add something to it?
There's a number of schools of thought about how best to do this. I think absolutely, absolutely the board has to have some legislative work. As I said, there's a number of ways to do it. One is to break it up in the policy areas. One is to have a specific committee. Now, and there's actually, I think, a really solid reason, no pun intended, to have a specific ledge committee to look at that, the beginning list in the beginning of the year of the whole bills that are slightly relevant and sort of triage that out to review the bills that we think.
You want to put triage bills annually? Is that what you're kind of saying?
Yeah, we definitely do that. It's both, that's the same thing.
So you feel like we got that?
Yeah, we do.
Okay.
So, no, I'm trying to differentiate a little bit here because, because on the one hand, there's definitely that need to function. I'm wondering though, and this is of course a larger discussion for the board, is does the ledge committee take key responsibility for enacted legislation, or should that go to the specific policy committees? And that's, like I said, that's a matter for more discussion later. The other is the regulations. It is similar to implementing legislation. Is that something that should be a centralized function for a ledge and regs committee? Should that be something that the execs look at, or should that again be delegated to the separate policy committees? But then there's one function though that that we also need to make sure we add, and that's the annual or biennial review of the practice acts and of the regulations to make sure that everything is up. But yeah, I'm glad you mentioned, because Sunset was going to be my next thing. This committee actually, I think, probably is the most logical one to carry the most responsibility for configuring our sunset legislation.
And you're saying those two should go under, so that review the practice act and configure.
I think those are more
should go
functions than purpose, but.
Okay. Well, we can
that's,
do
but
that's
that's
what
okay. But like I said, that's.
Actually, that, you did say
You're not-
function, so I just want to make,
Yeah.
so let's move it.
But like I said, these are, all different kinds of ways to do this, but,
Is review regulations different from review the practice act?
no.
Okay.
So review, yeah.
Because we want to get to the point where we are looking at and updating our regs on a
Can you
regular
undo?
basis.
And then do we want to take the highlighted part and the configure sunset relations and move it to functions?
I kind of think it is, but
Okay.
a function rather than a purpose.
Practice act. Is act singular, or would it be better with practice act or regulation?
There are two practice acts.
There are two practice acts and there are
Okay.
two sets of regs, so, yeah.
Okay, cool. So, and then,
Yes.
The PTs and the LDs.
oh.
They're
good point.
separate.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't
I'm a
know.
genius. Anything else we should add?
If it would be a function or a purpose, but I want to see the ledge and regs committee going out and meeting with the legislators and senators, so that when we do need, as we still do in the fee bill, maybe they can talk and possibly persuade or seek a author for our bills that we would like if they do not go through DCA.
I think that's a great idea, and in fact, I think, even more to the point, I think, that more localized, work, and that's where we would probably delegate, I think, outward, but the fact is that we have members on the, for example, the Assembly B&P committee that represent specific board members, districts, and having them go on that local thing, that's much more effective than all of us going up to
Well,
Sacramento.
Are there any other?
But we can do both,
But
and
you
so,
could do
Actually-
both because.
yeah.
Before we can figure
So-
out how
so-
we're gonna do it?
So
before-
set, meeting with legislators and policymakers, because we would want to include the governor's office as well.
All right, any other functions that we should add to this?
Well, I think this straddles purpose and function, but I think
Of course it does.
for purpose, I think you have the development of regulations. And then I think as a function, you have, first of all, the drafting, promulgation, and implementation of regulations are three separate functions. And an essential part of that function of developing regulations, I think before it goes to the full board, is for the committee to be involved in like a strategic outreach concerning any sort of proposed regulation.
That makes sense.
That was kind of one of the things I was thinking about, in addition to legislators, I think, union representatives.
Okay, so legislators,
And the
stakeholders?
licensee.
You know, did you say legislators and other
Yeah, we got-
stakeholders?
Sure,
There you go.
Sure.
that works.
And then a couple of things that were,
This is draft, draft.
Yeah, because I think the functions relating to, if you're going to be specific, relating to the development of regulations would be drafting, promulgating, and implementing.
So,
Promulgating relates to the rulemaking process itself. Drafting would be the process of development. Right?
Yeah. All right.
I like your idea, Elaine, you talked about, the board members going to their, districts and, promoting the bills that are in place. And, as someone who is not as familiar with how to promote and advocate for a certain bill, it would be helpful to get like a cheat sheet of like, hey, everyone, we encourage your people to your district, here's a cheat sheet, so under function, create these fact sheets so that we can meet with our legislators and promote adequately.
So-
Because actually,
Can I, and just give you some time, but tell me if I'm wrong, and I'm okay if we continue. Like, we don't need to necessarily get into the tasks. So that, to me, what you described, but you're the board, you decide. Like, what you described is almost a task that you would assign the staff to create for you, which is what other boards do.
but also, this was something that we talked about when we were doing strategic planning too, so, yeah, I think that's right along the lines.
and that's definitely doable.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else, any other functions? Or do we seem like we've got encapsulated it pretty well? And if we have,
Well,
we have, what kind of meeting frequency are we looking at here for?
see, this is the odd one,
We're
because
doing every quarter, but
Yeah, no, but I
if,
think
it should be more than, yeah, see,
based
things
on the
that,
legislative schedule.
okay.
That's what it's-
There.
Legislative schedule.
Beautiful.
Okay.
yeah,
So if we put meeting based, just
On
for meeting?
legislative calendar.
Okay.
But at a minimum quarterly, or no?
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna ask, do we want a minimum?
At minimum quarterly, but also based on the legislative calendar.
Okay.
Last quarter, we might not even need to.
Well, that's exactly, unless, of course, there's a lot of implementation.
Yeah, unless we're working on
Yeah.
regulations.
But see, then, of course, if you want to make, if you want to move implementation out to the policy areas, then that committee would not be drawn, but, yeah, there's a number of ways to do that, but yeah, that last quarter should be kind of quiet over there.
So, all right, so it sounds like we wrapped up.
You
That
never
was-
know.
Yeah.
That was swift, so that's pretty cool. So our last one that we talked about before we might have any more, is
Second
strategic
last.
outreach.
No, I
Oh, no, this is toast, because we,
We dealt with it, we dealt with this.
yeah. And then Cheryl said she wanted to add, oh, it might go.
Okay,
Yeah,
so,
second.
yeah, so administrative committee. You know, I know that is controversial. It's a controversial committee, but I want to make sure at least we address it and not overlook it.
So, what are our thoughts on the an idea for the administrative committee as a?
Okay, so it's been in place since, I guess, the monitor's report. And but there's a question as to whether it's still needed as a committee that meets regularly, or if it's something that you need as needed, or be subsumed in another committee. And so basically it was designed to address the concerns of staff, mostly, after some problems that have existed with the board in the past, in order to help to, you know, alleviate these complaints spiraling out of control to the public and to the legislature. So that was the main function, but it served other functions as well.
So do we feel like we still, from the other board members, staff too, I guess, board members mainly, do we feel like we still need that committee based on what it did? Do we feel like it solved whatever it meant to solve?
Yeah,
I think-
I fought for it, but, you know, I'm not going to continue to fight for it. But if anyone else has some other opinion, go ahead.
Insofar as it was a recommendation or suggested in the monitor's report, I think we should do that at least until the next sunset review.
Actually, this committee itself was not in the monitor's report per se. It was discussed and recommended by the ledge staff to the board members who promised to do so, but it was never in the actual official report.
That's what I meant by suggestion.
Sure. But suggestion being used
Sure.
loosely, of course.
So I recall at prior meetings, I think when the board was considering this issue, there was, the board wanted to seek input from the legislature, and I can't quite recall if
No, we
you did that.
received a letter for that.
Okay, what did the letter say?
The letter basically replied that in as much as they had not heard directly or indirectly any, let's just be bold and say, they had not received any communications, anonymous or otherwise, that would indicate, that would raise great concerns on their basis. They felt like as long as there was some avenue for communication, that they would be perfectly fine with not having a specifically named regular standing committee. That, you know, one of the suggestions that they thought worked well would, if the executive committee itself or their designee served as that avenue for communications for rank and file staff, then that would be adequate, I think.
That's what I was going to suggest, that we put under the functions of the executive committee.
Okay, may I just add some clarification
Certainly.
to that? I read it as that the board voted to have that committee, and so it's up to us to decide as a board whether we wanted to maintain that committee or use some other approach or some other committee. Was fine with that legislator who wrote the letter, as long as whatever committee was created would handle the complaints so that they would not have to deal with complaints.
So it sounds like.
Actually, thank you, and let me clarify that then. Yes, you are absolutely correct that the board creates whatever committees the board wants. But the letter came about as a question that board members had asked me to relay, in that since that legislative committee and those legislators had specifically called for that committee, the question that the board members had asked me to pursue was, do you think that this committee has done its work and must, according to your standards, must be continued based on, do the legislators still require us or strongly suggest that the board do so? But as you point out, you're absolutely correct that if the board wants to impanel that committee, the board can impanel that committee.
But I think.
But basically, the question that I was asked to get documentation was, would we still be required from their standpoint And that answer was, no, we're not.
And it sounded like maybe that was a function that we could move into the executive committee? is what I
That was
heard
one of the
from a few
options
people.
suggested.
Is that something?
I'm just listening, and I guess I kind of got lost about the interpretation of how the information would be gained from the staffing and elected officials. I kind of got lost. I know we did ask for some further clarification. I don't think I need to go any further on that. But the bottom line is, how do we provide or ensure there is support for staff and that staff feel comfortable, and actually the word is safe, in asking or telling about or questioning what they believe may be occurring or how they're feeling. And as a board, we're responsible for the staff as well, even though they might not be viewed as reporting directly to us.
Yes.
The real bottom line is, how do we ensure that? And if we are to ensure that everyone gets a fair hearing, what is the communication in the short term back to staff so that staff know there's an avenue?
So
If I'm interpreting right now, we're saying gone, goodbye, before we even do something here. So I think we've got things mixed. We're talking about future of what we're planning for committees. But the reality on this particular issue is it's a now piece. And I'm not sure the two discussions go together.
Vice Chair, would you accept that the executive committee could be that committee that takes those complaints and then brings it to the board? Because from the earlier presentations from all the other boards, it didn't seem like the other boards actually have an executive committee. Is that true or not true?
They were
No, I think
facing
they do.
sunset like we were.
No, I understand that. But I'm just saying we do have an executive committee. That's correct? And others do not.
Oh.
No, they do, but I think they're
Other
not.
boards do have.
Oh, because that wasn't on most of the other slides.
They do, but they don't need, it's only on as needed.
Okay.
And
I do want to make a quick comment, and I apologize because I wasn't around DCA when the conversation about the admin committee was in place, so I wasn't sure what were the factors that came into creating it. But what I do want to say is the Department of Consumer Affairs and boards as a state entity have human resources departments. We also have an equal opportunity employer department, which are designated and created to address workplace issues, whether it's harassment or hostile workplace environment. We have structures in place for employees that are designed to be safe spaces for employees to be able to come forward with their complaints. HR and EEO are critical pieces of state government, so that's why I'm unsure what would be the role of the admin committee in terms of administering these functions.
Well, in response to though all that you said was presented to us before, we're all aware of that. Those, whatever you just mentioned, was not sufficient to satisfy the staff that they had a safe environment to express themselves. And the position that they had taken is that the board doesn't care about us.
Right.
The board is not looking out for us. And that was a part of a complaint, which, was incorporated into the possibility that we would be sunsetted.
Right.
And so in order to avoid that, we came up with that. Now, if any point in time someone wants a list of what the administrative committee did, I can go into that. But, again, I don't want to get riled up, so I'm starting to fight for the committee again. I've already said, whatever the board decides.
I think we've talked about the executive committee could handle these things, and that's a great point. So thanks for that. Is there some word or words that we could put just to provide oversight of board staff complaints? Or I don't know what that wording is. I'm just.
Staff complaints?
No, but you will recall that this is actually more than one of the points we talked about when we were doing strategic planning last month, and so that is actually already on the list of you know,
Like things to
creating,
address.
creating that mechanism for safe communications.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
remember.
Yeah, so,
Absolutely, I remember.
So then do we even?
because I think that was your suggestion.
So that's a great point. It is in the
So-
strategic plan. We did.
All of this is.
So-
All of it is,
Yeah.
but
So expressing that.
Let's put it down. Let's lay it out.
Yeah,
Let's put
that's
it
where I'm
very
going.
clear.
So what words for function?
How about,
Actually, is the executive, let's back up a little bit. Provide oversight, staff, what other purpose what is the purpose of the
Can I
executive?
throw something out, just listening to what everybody said, how about provide an avenue for staff engagement? Because staff engagement can be complaints,
Yes.
it can be positive,
That's
it can
true.
be negative, so it's staff engagement.
Yeah,
So
you're right.
what your purpose as the executive, one of your purposes as our executive committee is to provide an avenue for staff engagement. And a function could be, and what you guys maybe just think of is, in addressing your concern here, is that maybe there is a letter from the entire board to our entire staff saying, hey, this is who we are, and if you have questions or concerns, this is your avenue for letting us know what's going on.
So can we put letter in function so we don't lose that thought?
Does that kind of help us a little bit to just have a positive growth? And get that engagement, so they know you want to know from them. You've written them a letter and introduced yourself.
So a letter to staff from all the board, providing them action, and at that meeting, at the executive committee meeting, start, what is that avenue, who are they, how would that contact happen? And
You're talking about the process, as you told us, the steps different in the function. That's the exact step to do, but the larger is a salary, function is a salary board or recipient and
Okay.
actor of.
like provide an avenue of, does that work for that, what you were saying, or do we need to juice it up?
We're just trying to follow directions
Yeah,
you
yes,
gave
yes,
us earlier.
yes, that is, yes. You're right. Yes, this is one of the purposes. We may come up with more, and you're right, this is how that purpose would happen.
I'm listening.
I know you are.
I would like to ask Ms. Turner how the purpose was carried out under the administrative committee
Yes,
structure.
well, first of all, we conducted individual interviews with any of the staff members who wanted to have an opportunity to speak with our committee board members, to express their concerns about whatever had happened, whatever we were planning. That was one thing. We provided a report of those issues to the board so that we can take action on. One of the issues was, a lack of promotion and training. So we got those statistics. We provided information to them on what services were available for that, for promotion and training. We conducted also a overall survey regarding how everyone at the board felt who was working there, about how big. We did the first survey.
So can I?
Yes, you want to stop me?
I do,
Okay,
but
I'm
politely, and the reason I say that is because what you're talking about is something that committee could take up
Yes.
to define what did we do in the past, how did that work, and then what do we want to do going forward.
Okay.
And I also just want to keep us on
All
time.
right, all right.
I just have 20 seconds as a follow-up. The administrative committee was formed for the specific purpose of staff engagement.
Absolutely.
And then
How do we ensure that?
Well, I guess the executive committee is going to take on that responsibility.
So, yeah,
now.
what we talked about is the executive committee would
You're
take
looking
on that.
for verbiage to add under function.
I think maybe it's under evaluation, evaluate and assess staff engagement or staff satisfaction.
Do we want to put that, evaluate staff engagement?
We could put under parentheses that could be one topic.
Okay.
And again, evaluation is really about where do you see a void, where do you see a gap?
And keep in mind, that's what the committees, you're right on, that's what the committees would, what should we evaluate in all of the areas, not just this one. But we'll put it here because we talked about it, might as well not forget it, right? Any other, we can go back to purpose, any other purposes of the
Probably
executive?
want to add and ensure safe space, I don't know how to say that.
Well, let's
for
we'll put the
engagement.
concept, ensure a safe space for staff.
Engagement.
Okay, yes, for staff engagement.
Isn't a purpose also the liaison to the executive staff?
Okay, so
Right.
liaison to executive staff.
Effectively, the executive committee is the oversight and supervisor of the
So why don't we put that in there? Liaison to executive staff and oversight to EO.
Yeah, I was gonna say evaluation, because I think there's supposed to be an annual evaluation.
So then a function would be, yeah, the annual EO evaluation.
EO, salary issues for EO.
I think we do annual EO evaluation that can include
Okay.
the
I
salary.
think salary
All right.
comes as part of it. I think that's-
Okay.
Any other, we'll kind of bounce it back.
No, the executive
Okay.
committee does a whole lot more than that.
There's also been general oversight and recommendation of, and I mean this broadly, board functioning.
Mhm.
No, I think that's
Yeah.
Yes,
a board
absolutely.
function.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good point.
And I just wanted, this is in line with what I see in other boards where they have an exec committee that only meets about once a year to conduct EO evaluation.
Well, in all fairness, that would be probably a smaller board, correct?
I bet you're right.
I think I've seen other large boards as well.
I think the only thing that's different for this board is the sunset review, right? And so I think until that's completely complete, I think we will probably need more regular, particularly for this.
Did we capture enough where we can move on to meeting frequency? Yes, sir.
I have one comment. Does the executive committee also agree to additional board meetings?
Yeah, I think
We make a
the core
recommendation
function-
about board schedules
Yeah.
and board meetings.
Yeah.
Would that-
if
See,
a special meeting needs to be held, does it have to go to the executive?
Would that be covered in
Correct.
board functioning, or do we
It
need that
does.
separate?
So the overarching function of the executive committee is that overarching function to make sure that every aspect of the board's work is properly assigned and properly completed. So the execs, for the past year and a half at least, have been looking at everything, the calendaring, the fiscal, legal issues, staffing issues, our strategic plan, the monitor's report, everything. So, like I said, the executive committee is responsible for oversight and recommendation for the overall board's function and administration.
I would say
And
that
everything
is
that comes out of that.
the core purpose of the executive committee is that last sentence.
Yeah, it
I
really
think by
is.
having it in this order, it's emphasizing the wrong thing. I think the core purpose is oversight recommendation.
And everything else is
Oh, that's
function.
great.
And hiring, not now, but next year. Hiring.
And then also, I think, because of the absence of any regulation or rules that have been adopted by the board, a core function or core functions of the executive committee are to call meetings and to appoint committee members.
Huh?
That's true.
Yeah.
Are we missing a body engagement? Liaison to executive staff and oversight to EO, but also to the board, right, in general?
Oh, to board members.
The board members, right?
That's a great comment.
Sure.
And we'll clean up the language for this one.
I think the other purpose that you guys have that's come about recently, right, with the DOJ letter, is that you have to make immediate decisions on emerging issues. I think that's really important. That's why we have our execs meet on a monthly basis.
Would that be a function or a purpose?
That's a purpose.
Well, we'll figure it out.
That's a purpose because
They have to do it.
we have to be able to have that nimble response on a monthly basis.
Right.
And if that didn't happen, there would have to be a full board meeting.
Yes.
And so you're talking about frequency and purpose. This ensures that the business of the board continues to go.
Can we move, make immediate decisions to function? That's what we said, right? And then it sounded like we were talking about meeting monthly? That's, yeah?
One other thing about purpose, I think this is purpose, is since each committee is going to have an evaluation component, the executive should
Summarize.
summarize, receive, compile, order, identify that gap and kind of move forward that evaluation, the ad hoc evaluation of a crisis or a gap.
Yeah.
I don't know how to put it, but it's like,
I think,
this committee will be the one that says, we have a big issue, we need to evaluate it,
Can we
let's
put,
do it.
And
analyze all
so,
other?
so
Yeah.
possibly delegate or assign to committees or board members?
All other committees?
That is a function,
that.
really.
Gotta remember
Bigger
those.
than that. Again, what you're describing, it ensures the functioning of the board. And someplace the board has to have itself or have an immediate representative, in this case the executive committee, that has a sense of what's happening in all of the areas. That's why the liaisoning with the EO and the other executive staff.
So would that also include that if we needed to call the ad hoc committee for the evaluations to come together,
It could.
that we would call that and delegate to members to take on that task?
I think that's covered, yeah.
So even when you have to analyze, would that be more of a function than a purpose?
I was thinking, yeah, to analyze all other committees evaluation.
So it's not, I don't think it's analyzed, I think it's more of
It's to provide a summary.
Review.
Well,
It's
I
stuff
think,
like
I think
briefing.
where you're getting this, Paula, I think is the executive committee should be monitoring all the other committees and
Oh, why don't we put
making
that?
sure there's the,
Monitor.
yeah,
That's what exec does in many other boards.
yeah.
Monitor all
Not
other,
necessarily DCA boards, but the larger
Committees
boards
and
and
would
boards.
it be just monitor all other committees,
Yes.
period?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Because that fits into your function.
And we're talking quality control here.
yeah, that's awesome.
thank you.
All right, so we're feeling like we, what did we come up with? We have the, see how good my memory is. I only wrote 4 and I'm missing 3, or 2, or 1. Executive Committee, Licensing Committee, Enforcement Committee, Legislation Committee, what's the name?
Strategic planning.
Yeah.
Education, we took evaluation out. Education.
Oh, Education Committee, hello, Education Committee. So we feel like those are the 5 committees that we like, we're good with. And then the next phase will be to, somehow you all are going to need to establish, oh, yeah.
On executive committee, the members would be the president and the vice chair.
Well, president, vice president.
Vice president.
Or no, President and Vice President?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so have we concluded what we set out to do?
I think so.
Everybody's content? We always like to measure what we do, what worked, what didn't work, because we're able to get to it, so you've probably seen these before, but take them down, pass it around, and,
So do you guys have to make a motion or something?
Do we
We
need to go
do.
back and the other committees and do those right now, or we?
Yeah, and you can vote on it.
Well, for
Well, she can make the
Do
president,
you want to make a motion now, or do you want us to work with Solid and provide some cleanup and?
oh, we should probably do that.
I think we can entertain a motion and then vote the full board, well, when you
And have it
request,
finalized in August?
well, when you request the members who want to be on which committees to get the feedback too, and then we'll finalize it and then appoint the members at that time.
You know,
One more thought on my end is if you want to talk about meeting structure, if you want to do that now or at a later time, where you, I know you, in many of these committee meetings you said quarterly, but is there, do you want to do combined committee meetings? Do you want to do it on an as-needed basis? Like, how do you want the scheduling to work?
oh, Patrick.
I'm so glad Patrick said that.
You know I enjoy being in people's way for lunch, so.
So, excuse me, wouldn't it kind of also help to know who the committee members are, so
Yeah.
that John doesn't have to fly up 3 times during a month or something?
Who is it?
Just as an example.
So, 2 parts, the establishing who the committee members are, I think you mentioned that we'll figure it out. And absolutely, I'll figure, and then, that's a good point, did you want to use the BRN example of all these 5 committees would meet 1 month before the regular board meeting? And think of it like everybody coming together as a structured day.
At least.
Maybe
committee
to
should,
combine some on some days.
yeah.
Yeah, maybe not all five at once.
Yeah, see,
I don't think you can do all 5 at once. That
you
would
can't,
be
and some of them really
overlap
should
and-
not be.
Yeah. But I would suggest that they meet at least 1 month before the board meeting for the quarterly time frame, so that it gives the staff time to get the reports ready for the board members, and it gives the committees time to review the report before it, and the minutes before it goes to board members.
Okay. May I make a suggestion? Why don't we, as we kind of go through the process of cleaning up the work we've done here, we put together the kind of the scenarios of